Alright, so here we are. This is the very last page of Badger 2. Normally when I do the inking of these pages, I like to do a live stream. But more and more I've noticed people asking me questions pertaining to how I construct the stories, questions about the characters, questions about the direction that the project's going in. And that's kind of I have a hard time thinking in those terms while my mind's busy working with my hands. It has something to do with the left and separation of the left and right brain hemisphere. I don't know. So anyway, that's a big part of the purpose of this. I've got this video sped up ×2, so it's going to look like I'm drawing a little bit faster than I am. My live streams usually average about an hour and a half. I think this video is only about 38 minutes. So if you're wondering if it looks like I'm going real quick, it's because I am, but I'm not. Over and above that, I really want to thank everybody for their support of the project. All you guys for watching this video. Like, I don't know, it's unreal. I'll be totally and completely honest and tell you guys that this is not the first time that I've tried to make a project like this. I think this is probably the 4th or 5th attempt in my life of something so high maintenance. It's time consuming. It's a huge risk of my time investment to be able to build something like this, and you guys supporting it, watching this, I honestly floored every time I see somebody walking around wearing one of those Badger t-shirts. It's unreal to me. It's a really awesome, validating feeling, and I cannot express how much I appreciate that from all you guys. The print copies of Badger 2 are set to launch next week. I've got 10 of the first 25 for $25, which will all be signed and numbered. Those are pre-sold. So if you guys want one of those, it's probably best to get on that sooner instead of later, because they are not going to last long. I talk about the art style a lot in depth when I do my live streams from questions that are prompted, so I'm not going to go into that too much here. I am using a Hunt 102 Crow Quill nib, and the boulder lines are done with a 512, and I think towards the end of this video you guys are going to see me use it's a Japanese ink pen brush. It was Japanese or Korean, I don't remember. I bought it at a local art store here. And this is Speedball Super Black. That's what I'm inking with. Now, as promised, Badger. What the hell is Badger? What prompted me to make Badger? At the end of the day, so I've already committed that I'm going to make it at the very least a bare minimum of 5 issues to this. I have the end to the 5th part of the story already figured out, so I do have a real strong sense of where this is going. There's obviously on the surface the quest for the dangerous book that Katori's concerned could potentially destroy her forest. She just has a whole bunch of ethical hang-ups pertaining to necromancy. She's very uncomfortable. So that's kind of her goal, and that's what drives the story forward. My purple guy, who, if you were so inclined, he does actually have a name. It's coded. It's written in the first issue in the script of his first language, and you can find a codex to pull that all apart on the first page of Badger 2, where he goes in that long-winded, just expository. It's a recap, right? That's why I put that in there. It's a recap of what happened in issue 1. I just didn't want it to come off as super ham-fisted and be like, previously on Badger. I thought it'd be a lot more fun to have him kind of journaling his own thoughts, or having this little private soliloquy. It was a nice lead-in for that joke, I think. So, now, the overall theme, or the underlying theme of Badger is that As far as the primary goal of the party, if you will, goes, pertaining to the dangerous necromancy book, Badger really doesn't have a stake in that. He's a little too caught up in himself. Badger, as is revealed in part 2, considers himself to be a bard, just a blanket term for a storyteller. He doesn't make it really clear what his specialty is, whether he's a musician or artist or comedian. I'm probably leaning more towards comedian. But most of the choices he makes, and most of the way that he interacts with other people, he self-sacrifices for the joke, and he sets things up so that when they don't work out, he has a designed-in excuse for why they don't work out, right? Like, that's the one common thread between my 3 main characters, my purple guy, Katori, and Badger, is that they're all very socially masochistic people or creatures. And the underlying point that's going to be made through the course of Badger is learning where to draw the line between this self-indulgence, because if you're not having fun making the thing, people can feel that. Like, it's really important to please yourself first, but it's arguably more important to make sure that your audience has a stake in what you're trying to tell them. I know that's really washy. That's a really abstract. And I'm going to try really hard not to come off as too pedantic or pretentious while I'm going through this whole thing. This is one of the reasons why I don't talk about how I write. I lean towards more of a show don't tell kind of style. I don't want to ruin too much of it by pulling back too much of the curtain, but yeah, at the end of the 5 issues of Badger, I really want, and I'm not going to sit here and say that, I'm qualified to do this, but I think it's a really fun, fun's a good word. It's a really unique take on it to try to tell this story about a guy trying to figure out how he fits in the world as a storyteller, while you yourself are also trying to figure out how to fit into the world as a storyteller. So there's definitely an abstract level of self-insertion here. Like I said, self-indulgence, you got to figure out where to draw that line, but you definitely need part of it. I've had a couple people ask me if Mark is going to make another appearance. Mark was one of the very first characters I introduced in this series, and I think I killed him off on like page 7 or 8 of the first issue. Spoiler alert if you haven't read the first issue. Mark's definitely going to be present again towards the end of the series. Around issue 4 or 5, he's going to make a comeback. We're going to have the party move in towards the city center where they have to take care of something. I don't want to spoil too much of it by giving you guys the whole picture of that, but Mark's not gone. I'm going to bring in characters. Like, characters are definitely going to walk in. Some of them are just going to very quickly fall down pits and vanish off the face of the earth forever, but I'm not throwing Mark away. So people who are really invested in that, honestly, like, if I'm just talking about it from my point of view, Mark's one of my favorite character designs that I've done, so there's no way I'm going to get rid of him. Black Dog might end up getting his own spin-off out of this too. The more I think about who Black Dog is as a character and how he ended up getting to know Badger, and like all this stuff's all super super concrete in my head. So there'll definitely be room to play with some other stuff outside of the main narrative down the line. Now, just stuck here with dead air. I'm trying to think of what else to talk about. It's the biggest character flaw that Badger has, and the biggest thing that's holding him back, given what he wants to do, is, well, it's ultimately it comes down to a lack of confidence. That's a huge part of it. But he does undercut himself constantly. Like in the first issue, when he breaks that lantern, there was absolutely no need for him to break that lantern. He was just trying to see if he could get a giggle, essentially, out of Mark with it, and he very quickly decided that the gag was worth the sacrifice. And I think it's about 4 pages later I end up having him vocalize how much he regretted that decision. And they kind of end up in a similar situation here towards the end of the second issue. If you guys haven't looked at all this yet and don't know the story, I'm not going to ruin it for you here, but let's just say he put some work into designing another self-destructive move that wasn't the smartest thing, but it did solve the situation. So he's breaking eggs to make omelets. My purple guy is he's a fun character that I put together. Uh, I've made purple guy to kind of help really reinforce this theme of this not fitting in, this ostracization that these guys all feel, whether they've implemented it onto themselves or not. So I thought the easiest way to make that super clear was to have this hardly humanoid, like he's bright purple, he sticks out like a sore thumb, and he's very poorly socialized. He has a really hard time explaining himself. He's just not used to people. I think he's he's probably the worst of them all for just having a hard time buying a pair of shoelaces kind of guy. I just think that really sells it. I hope that brings more attention towards these qualities in the other two characters, because everybody feels it hard. And I think over time, over the course of this series, we're probably going to end up getting into realizing that that's going to be a huge part of what binds these three people together, despite the fact that they have, well, people, I use that term loosely, but despite the fact that they all have such very different goals. Badger's just set on being an entertainer while trying to compromise as little of himself as he can possibly do, and what he deems to be pandering. I think at some point, probably around issue 4, we're going to have Badger, when they get into the capital city, I'm going to have him in situations with other bards that are more successful. That's going to bring out more of that part of his character, that, you know, oh, well, that guy over there, yeah, he's just pandering, he's just sucking up to him, he doesn't even believe in that, there's nobody honest inside of the city, right? Like, we're going to have a lot of insight, a lot more insight into how Badger is who he is and the way that he thinks. Katori here. Katori's actually Katori's not my character. Not originally. She's not my character. Katori's a character that my fiance Kristen has been using for years in RPGs, and she played her in World of Warcraft. She still plays her in Dungeons and Dragons. Uh, Katori's not really mine, but having said that, I did I made the character design. She's one of my favorite character designs, honestly. Katori, I don't know what exactly it is. I can't put my finger on it, and I wish I could. But she's probably the one I have the most fun drawing out of everybody I've come up with so far. But her destructive character trait, and the thing that's going to hold her back through the majority of the story, is she is destructively self-reliant. She's figured out what she needs in order to get what she wants out of life, and has cut most of, if not all, of the reliance on other people out of it. I've got a bit of a backstory for Katori that I'm not going to go into too much right now, because that might end up being another piece that I do outside of the main narrative, like a little bit of a spin-off or a one-off thing. But more to talk about the way the story develops. Badger 2 is very different than Badger 1, and I did that on purpose, partially based on feedback that I was given from the first issue. So I had a fair few people tell me that there isn't a lot to grab onto. The first issue of Badger is there are little hints of what drives these characters, but there's not really a lot of development towards them. It's heavily focused on how the party ends up meeting. It's a lot of intentionally trying to subvert the expectations of what people think they're going to see when they read a story. So, like, initially out of the gate, you go look at the front cover, and a lot of people would assume that Katori is going to be the main character, and the story really it's about Badger. It's about all of them, but Badger's the main character. Like I said, the big theme that's going to stretch over the whole thing is learning how to have other people be invested in the story that you're trying to tell. That's what we're batting at here. But so you look at the front cover, and I've had people tell me they assume that Katori is going to be the main character. So that was a little bit of a surprise, since she's not even brought up until about halfway through the book. And then you get into reading it, and you're going to automatically get, or want to get invested in Mark. Mark's in charge at the very beginning. And I kind of have a lot of doors open without a lot of explanation in the first little bit. Like, how did Badger end up getting to that church in the first place? How did Badger and Mark know each other? Why is Badger, who clearly isn't well suited for what he's been tasked with, like, how did all this come to be? We have a guy that's like 3 feet tall that's in there digging holes. Mark says out loud in the first issue, I think he says it takes Badger something like 3 or 4 days to dig a hole. There's no way it should take 3 or 4 days to dig a hole. Like, he's not dude's short, he's got little arms, he can't work efficiently, not that way. But as long as Mark wasn't doing it himself, he really didn't care. It was more of a power trip for him. Just found someone small and weak to push around. Trying not to go off on too much tangent here and get derailed, but I really don't even remember why I brought up that last point. I think my purple guy. Let's talk about purple guy. Purple guy probably has the heaviest axe to grind here out of everybody. Badger is a tricky one to figure out. Katori thinks that she's got it figured out. Purple guy's got a very, very clear point to prove. So he's the most heavily alienated of all of them. Purple guy is not human. He's not from a human settlement. He is from a colony of his own kind. And even amongst his own kind, he's a complete one-off. He does mention in Badger 2. I'm going to put this a little bit of a spoiler in there because I think it's the best thing I have for characterization of him so far. He mentions that he's from a colony of a very pragmatic culture. Everybody knows exactly what they're doing. Everything has a clear point. They're not trying to figure anything out. His civilization runs almost like a machine. And if they are going to investigate and they're going to look into stuff, they're going to look into stuff that they know they can apply a scientific method to be able to achieve a real clear answer. Purple guy is obsessed with the abstract. But because of his upbringing and the way that he spent the earlier years of his life, he was surrounded by these people who all did have this obsession with critical thinking that he can apply to abstract situations in weird ways. He's also, I'm not going to lie, an expository device that I use because he's inhuman and experienced a lot of things that the other two haven't, but he also hasn't experienced a lot of things that would be common to most people. He's kind of my excuse. He's like the assistant to the doctor in Doctor Who. He's the reason why my other characters have to stop and explain stuff, which is why I thought he was really good for that epilogue at the beginning of Badger 2, that little summary. It made sense to me that it'd be a good idea to introduce him as that role by having him play back basically what just happened. And there was no reason for him to say it out loud because all the other characters, they already know they were there, right? So if I were to try to explain what happened in Badger 1 at the beginning of Badger 2, that would have to be one of two things. It would have to be one of those full pages of text at the front, which I kind of alluded to by having it set up where he says it once in his language, and then I kind of translate it underneath. So like what's spoken in the common tongue, in this case English, aren't the words that are being said, and I make that really clear on page 2 where I cut in with that, shut the fuck up, like that joke right there. So he's just prattling on, really explaining stuff that there'd be no reason for anyone to have to explain, except for the fact that he's playing with it in his own mind, so he can kind of lock it in, set it and forget it, and then be able to move on to think about other weird, abstract alien stuff while they're walking around. I didn't want to do that full page, G.I. Joe style, previously on Badger. So there are a lot of layers to this. It's really hard to explain it all. I'm not going to lie, you guys. If that gets picked up in audio, I just went and took a little rip off my vape. All right, let's get off the subject of talking about how the story's constructed and the characters and stuff. I think I've done pretty much enough of that for now. Uh, Here's another thing that's particularly interesting about the way that Badger's being constructed compared to other projects. I have, at this point, abandoned my direct quest for an outside publisher. I'm going to continue to foot the bill to have the cost of these books being printed, and I'm just going to circulate them myself. And there are a couple reasons for that. One is in all honesty, I've already been turned down by a couple of publishers. They think it's a little too weird, or maybe I'm just not a good enough salesman. That's more than likely the case, honestly. I mean, listen to this. But I also like the idea, the ability to not have to compromise to this the market research level of our current zeitgeist. Like, I personally think a lot of stuff that you see now, it feels there are a lot of common threads you can pull through it, and I know that's just always the case with art. Like, you can't come out of the gate and present something that's 100% completely new and unique, or else it's not going to land. And it took me a while to realize that, and that's something that I'm playing with in Badger. My last couple projects, I was basically Randy from South Park when he goes on those long tangents about having integrity, and I'm trying to break myself of that habit. So, like, at first when I started Badger, I felt like I was piggybacking too much off of, well, like Tolkien and like Lord of the Rings, Dungeons and Dragons, just having this high fantasy setting. It felt like it wasn't, like, I didn't own it. It wasn't entirely mine. That's something I've shaken off since then. I'm getting way more comfortable with that at this point, because it is such a odd, absurd, unique thing. If anything, at this point, I'd be more afraid that I'm coming off as if I'm trying to emulate Terry Pratchett, which I'm not. But definitely has more of a Discworld kind of feel than a Lord of the Rings kind of feel. So yeah, I'm hoping to sometime in the very near future have print copies of Badger warehoused in the United States. The printer that I used for the first 25 for $25, I believe they were based out of Michigan. They're called Comics Wellspring. Great company. They do awesome work. The problem that I was having, and why I don't use them currently, is because of importation fees. Where this project's being done here and circulated primarily through Canada, because that's where I am. If I go to order product through the US, I have to pay additional over my shipping just for bringing it up across the border. And I think part of that is to try to encourage Canadians to stimulate their own economy instead of just buying stuff from the US, because for the most part in the US it is cheaper, but it's not once you pay that damn importation tax. So right now I'm having Badger printed primarily at a local university here in Fredericton, and that's where I get my copies of the book. So you can buy Badger online right now. I just set it up on my coffee shop. I'll put a link to that in the description of this video, but there is an online store where you can buy and have mailed out physical copies. And once I get through the first 25 for Badger 2, I'm going to have that set up as well once I get into my normal print run. So you'll be able to get Badger 1 and 2. I'm going to make Badger 2 available for digital download. I still have Badger 1 up on Gumroad. I don't promote that link nearly enough, so I do have a link tree. I'll put that in the description of the video as well. A lot of what I've come to learn over the past year or so is uh, you got to put a lot of time and thought into marketing when you're doing this sort of stuff. It's tricky to try to make people aware of it and also not feel like you're coming off as that dick that's always talking about what he wants and not about other people's stuff. But I do try to bring up the project as often as I can without overdoing it, and that's a fine line for sure that I'm having fun dialing in. And it's going to be interesting to see how Badger manages to dial that in, because that's a mountain he's going to have to climb at some point too. That confidence. It's actually way easier to sit down and just write and draw this stuff than it is to confidently approach someone and try to ask them if they'd be interested in looking at it. I don't know why that is. Just those little scratchy lines for texture in the road and the buildings. That's the fun thing about using the dip pen. With the dip pen compared to like the first issue of Badger, I actually started drawing out of my sketchbook. This right now I'm doing on a drafting table, which is a gift. It was a gift from Kristen. She actually got it for me. I'd like to hope that my work's gotten a lot better and more consistent since then, but I actually started just with a sketchbook wrapped around my thigh, and I was using these Pigma Micron technical pens, and I still use them a little bit. I use them for the lettering, and I use them a lot for the first half of this, but I'm pretty much exclusively onto these dip pens now. You see just so much variation in the line, and you can get so many different line thicknesses out of just the one tool. It's just I think it's way more interesting, personally, to use the dip pen. Maybe not for coloring. Maybe I should have used a brush for this. It's just time consuming. Another thing I want to resolve to try to do is I need to spend more time on TikTok. I know that's where a lot of people are. A lot of people are discovering projects like this. I'll let you guys know right now, as of the recording of this, I've got about 100 copies of the first issue of Badger that's out in the world in circulation, and that is entirely thanks to you guys and people like you that are actually like sitting down watching this YouTube video right now. That is incredible. Thank you all so much. I know it's kind of cliche, but I cannot express the fact that this project is entirely dependent on your guys' support and your guys' interest, and I love that this seems to be landing with so many of you, and it seems to be landing really hard with some of you, and that just makes me beam. I have no words. It's a very different project. Like, there are a lot of similarities to how other cartoons are done and other cartoons are drawn, other cartoons are written, but I don't know. I don't know if a story about a guy trying to learn how to tell stories. I'm sure there's no way I could be the first person to ever do this, but I know it's definitely not something that's overdone. And it's a story about a guy trying to gain confidence. And I hope that's useful to some people out there that are listening to this. It's about 3 misanthropic, masochistic loners just trying not to die in a super hostile world. That's basically it at the end of the day, and it's gonna come into themes of how important it is to work with other people to get over this socially self-destructive, these habits, these defense mechanisms we set up for ourselves, and to find a way to make the world, to put out into the world what you can to try to make it your own, but without alienating people or coming off as an asshole, really. And no matter what happens, no matter how distribution of the project goes or sales pick up or it just stays steady the way it is, like at the end of the day, if when the fifth issue comes out, and honestly, like I'm more than willing to go beyond 5 issues. 5 issues is not a hard stop thing that's set in my mind. I will do over 5. What I'm getting at when I keep saying the 5 issue thing is I'm committing to the fact that come hell or high water, there will be 5 issues of Badger. I need 5 issues to be able to make the point that I'm trying to make with this. There might be more than that. And at the end of the fifth issue, the takeaway, I want the takeaway to be exactly that. You can shape the world the way that you want to, but it's important to make sure that you can keep other people on board with it. Ensuring that you're working to help people, I guess, really, in like a weird way. Anyway, I think that was kind of all over the place. Those are my thoughts. Those are my honest to God thoughts, as best as I can do without being influenced by being asked questions in the chat, which I love. I absolutely love. You guys interacting with the project, that's fantastic. If anybody has any thoughts or any, leave reviews on the Facebook page, leave comments on this YouTube video. Like, I'm open to critique. I always want to get better at what I'm trying to do, and I'm so thankful that you guys want to see this, that you guys let me do this. That's awesome.